Part 3. Today is Wednesday, and it's March 24th. Today we are learning the final part of our Pesach crash course. I'm Rabbi David Vigler, and a pleasure to be here with you as we learn, as we prepare for Pesach this weekend, starting Saturday night at 8 to 12 p.m., I believe is the earliest time to begin your Pesach Seder. And we're learning about what you need to know in order to be able to observe Pesach, the Seder, all the way as it is traditionally supposed to be done. Without any further ado, I'm going to get straight into it. We're doing part 3 and the final part of our Pesach crash course right now. What we've spoken about in the first 2 parts of this mini series, mini crash course, is a general introduction to Pesach, as well as yesterday we spoke about the early stages of the Seder. Good morning, Alicia. And today we're going to be talking about the rest of the Seder, starting with the breaking of the Matzah and the reading of the Haggadah. So before we begin reading the Haggadah, good morning, Ed Hockman, nice to see you. Before we begin reading the Haggadah, what we do is we break the Matzah. There are 3 matzahs we mentioned yesterday underneath the Seder plate. The middle matzah is the one that is broken in half, with the smaller piece being left on the Seder in the middle of the 3 matzahs, and the larger piece being put away to be consumed later by the people around the Seder table as the exchange of what was supposed to have been the Paschal lamb. Since today we don't have a Paschal lamb, we don't have a temple, therefore our temple is destroyed, we don't have the Paschal lamb. Instead of the Paschal lamb, we eat the larger piece of the middle matzah. It's called the afikoman, which actually means dessert in Aramaic. We will be talking a little bit more about that later. The reason for this is because matzah is already poor man's bread. It's already very simple food. It's just flour and water. There's nothing fancy about it, even though it's ironic how it's actually pretty expensive, but that's a different problem with regards to economics. But the matzah itself is technically poor man's bread. It is what the poor people would eat, just bread and flour and water. And when we break the matzah, we even further indicate our sense of humility, our sense of surrender, our sense of slavery, in order to as part of the psychological process of breaking out of Egypt, breaking out of our limitations and our resentments and our problems, breaking out of our modern day prisons, psychological prisons. To be able to do that, you have to have the courage to face your demons. And that's why when you actually break the matzah, it's like an acknowledgement of, I have a problem. I am poor man's bread. I have a problem. You're facing your problems, you're verbalizing your demons, you're acting them out, and that is the first step in towards healing. Another thing that we do before we read the bulk of the Haggadah. Good morning, Howard and Susan. Oh, Howard and Susan, that's who it is. Howard, Susan is 2 people, not 1. Nice to see Howard and Susan from Boynton. We also pour the second cup of wine, just like we poured the first cup of wine before Kiddush at the beginning of the Seder. Remember, there are 4 separate cups of wine that need to be consumed during the entire Seder by each and every person, with a minimum of a little bit more than 1.6 ounces of wine actually drunk in each of those 4 cups of wine. Again, we overflow the cup, as is traditional, as mentioned yesterday, as below, so above. As we overflow the blessings for our cup for God, so too does God overflow his blessings for us. We don't drink the cup, though, at this point. This is the cup over which we will be reading the Haggadah. And then before we start the Haggadah, we read the 4 questions, the Manishtana, which is, again, the Seder is designed to be an educational experience, whether it's for the children, whether it's for other people around the table, or even if it's just for ourselves. We learn through asking questions. We teach through engaging. And when the children see things that are different, when we see things that are different, we're inspired to ask questions and to talk about it. And indeed, that is the perfect opening for the Haggadah. The word Haggadah, which means to tell, to narrate, to talk about. This is how we do education. Education happens around our tables. Education doesn't happen when you delegate someone else to teach your kids when you send them off to some foreign country to learn. Education is a conversation that you have with your children. And even if you don't have children around your Seder table, even if you're sitting alone, it's important that we ask the questions ourselves before we provide the answer. And the answer indeed is the mitzvah of the night. That is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story of the Exodus from Egypt as told in a narrative arc which begins on a low and ends on a high. We talk about how we began as idolaters, how we began as slaves in Egypt, and ultimately God redeemed us and brought us to the heights of all heights as the chosen people and his chosen people. I mean, that is an unbelievable place to be, and for us to be able to experience the gratitude and the blessing associated with that. If you're not able to read the entire Haggadah, and I don't know why you wouldn't really be able to read the entire Haggadah. It's really not that long, and you can read it in English. The mitzvah is to understand the Haggadah. Therefore, even if you can't, if you need it for whatever reason, if you're rushing to nowhere, then at least read the following parts. Avodim Hayinu, which is the paragraph of how we were slaves in Egypt. Talk about the 4 sons, the 4 kinds of Jews. V'hisha Amda is the paragraph that talks about how in every generation there are those that try to cut us down, that try to destroy us. But the one thing that always has stood for us is Hashem. Mickey Asi wrote, no, I don't know what that means. But good morning to you, Mickey. Travel safe towards your destination. So Vehishamda is the one thing that always stood for us in every time, in every tribulation, in every struggle, has always been the presence of Hashem that has always carried us through our troubles and our problems and our nemesis, even when it comes to something as raw as the Holocaust, which is a very difficult pill for us to swallow. We too are able to still recognize 75 years later that we survived to tell the tale. And whether we choose to like it or not, in hindsight, is 20/20 vision, and God allowed us to survive. Yes, we have big questions about the Holocaust, but we know that we actually landed on our feet, and we are here to tell the tale. And when we look back, and you talk to survivors, we just had a Windows to the World event with a ballerina of Auschwitz, and she was saying about how Auschwitz inspired her faith in God instead of doing the opposite. Also important to mention in the Haggadah, if you're going to do an abbreviated route, is to mention the 10 plagues and to pour a drop of wine from the glasses, from the Kiddush cups, connoting the fact that we don't overly rejoice over anyone else's suffering, even if it's of our vile Egyptian oppressors. And finally, it'd be nice to mention Dayenu, which is again a song of gratitude, to say that if only God did this for us, it would have been enough. If only God did that for us, it would have been enough. Dayenu is that beautiful song, Dayenu, 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 which really helps us appreciate everything that we have. Expect nothing and appreciate everything in our relationship with God, especially when you understand that we started off as slaves. God doesn't owe us anything. He really doesn't owe us anything. And the fact that he chose us and he picked us up from the schmutz and he dusted us off and he helped us up and he chose us and he appointed us and he married us. I mean, that's an unbelievable appreciation. Regardless of what happens during your Haggadah experience, there are 3 parts, three concepts in the Haggadah that absolutely must be mentioned in order to fulfill your obligation, and they happen right at the very end of the reading of the Maggid, of the reading of the narrative of the Haggadah story. And that is just before we break the Matzah. Very, very important that you discuss the 3 mitzvahs of Pesach, and they are the Pesach, the Paschal lamb, the Matzah, which is Matzah, and the Maror, which is the bitter herbs. We actually cite Rabban Gamliel, who stated that one who does not mention these 3 items at the Pesach Seder has not fulfilled his obligation properly. And then, therefore, when we recite them, the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror, the Paschal lamb, which we look at the Matzah, the Matzah. Sorry, we look at the Zroa. I mean the top right of the Seder plate, which is the shank bone of the chicken neck, and the Matzah and the Maror. We actually look at them as we mentioned them in the Haggadah. I see the Hannah and Andy on the road to Louisville. Freedom indeed. Drive safely and keep your eyes on the road, Hannah. Good to hear from you guys. It's super interesting to see how this year in Pesach we actually are traveling. People on the move, contrasting this with last year's Seder, which was like everybody was homebound. Nobody was going anywhere on earth. We were just stuck. And thank God we're in a position this year where we're at least we're able to, some of us are able to connect with the other members of our family. I mean, look, we're doing a community Seder here at Chabad. It's pretty amazing. As we finish the Haggadah, the conclusion of Magid pivots towards the beginning chapters of Hallel, which is the songs of praise, shifting the focus from storytelling to giving thanks. And to that end, the matzahs that have been uncovered the entire time are now covered, the matzahs upon which we recited the Haggadah while they were visible. Now Magid concludes with the blessing of Asher Ge'alanu, praising God for the exodus from Egypt and expressing hope for the future redemption. We conclude the Magid with the drinking of the second cup of wine, upon which we read the entire Haggadah in the same manner that you drank the first cup, reclining to your left, preceded by a blessing of Hagafen. And from this, it's not that long. The reading of the Haggadah is really not that long. I think we do it here at Chabad in about 30, 40 minutes. It's really not a big deal. And we do it in English. We discuss it. And then we move on to the matzah. When we reach the matzah, we first wash our hands before the matzah, like you would before washing bread. It's 3 times on the right and 3 times on the left, making sure that the water goes all the way up to your wrist, and making sure that you dry your hands properly before eating the matzah. All this in preparation for the biblical mitzvah of eating matzah on the Passover night. Remember, if you didn't yet pick up your shmura matzah at the Chabad, please do so before Friday so that you can have shmura matzah at your Seder. We make 2 blessings on the matzah. One is for hamotzi, the regular blessing, hamotzi for any bread, like matzah is a form of bread, and the other unique blessing for the mitzvah of al achilas matzah, on the mitzvah of eating matzah. It is important to know that we eat the matzah while reclining, but also that you have to have the minimum requirement of matzah in order to fulfill your obligation. Just like we said that when it comes to the wine, each of the 4 cups of wine have to have 3.2 ounces of wine within them, and you have to drink a little bit more than 1.6 ounces of each of those cups, just at least 51% of each of those cups. So too, when it comes to eating the shmura matzah on Pesach night, you have to eat at least a half of an average sized shmura matzah. So if you have the small sized shmura matzah, some of which we have available here at the shul, then you have to actually eat a whole shmura matzah, a whole small one. But if you're eating the large ones, then you have to have at least half of an average sized shmura matzah. And that's interesting, a little bit about the meditation here on the wine and the matzah. You know, matzah is bland. It doesn't really have much taste. It's not as bad as people say that it is. I actually really like the shmura matzah. Shmura matzah is made out of flour and water. It's pretty much meant to be tasteless. It's not supposed to taste like an eggplant parmesan or something. It's flour and water, for heaven's sake, right? So the shmura matzah has no taste. On the other hand, the wine has a good taste, right? It's very, people pay a lot of money for certain kinds of wines. So the word taste in Hebrew is the same word for logic, tam. Tam means a reason or logic. It also means taste. So wine represents logic, understanding, and matzah represents not understanding, no taste. It represents faith. And which one is more important when you serve God? Is it more important to serve God with wine, which means understanding everything about our relationship with God, or is it more important to serve God out of faith when you don't understand? Which is more of a noble endeavor and more of a noble route? And on the Pesach night, we learn that both of them are vital. We have to have a solid, unshakable foundation of faith. I do what I do because God told me to do it, and that's it. I believe that God exists. Yes, I believe that God wrote the Torah. Yes, I believe that God took us out of Egypt. I can't exactly prove it. It doesn't matter. It's faith. And God gave us the Torah with all the commandments of the Torah. Now, after you have a solid foundation of faith, which is matzah, now what you do is that on top of that, you build with rhyme and reason. Now you try to understand the reasons behind the faith. We try to push the envelope, to push the boundaries of our faith with understanding, so that what I understood yesterday becomes something what I believed yesterday is something which I understand today. And what I believe today, I will strive to understand tomorrow. And that's the essence of the meaning of Chabad. Chabad is not a denomination of Judaism. Chabad means logic, wisdom, understanding, and realization. It is the 3 steps of intellectual assimilation of our souls, of understanding and feeling something, a piece of wisdom. Chabad is an approach to faith, which is through understanding. And that's also echoed the same sentiment when the Jewish people were offered the Torah in Mount Sinai 7 weeks after the exodus from Egypt. God asked them if they wanted the Torah, and they said, yes, we will do, and then we will understand. First, we will do. We'll do it out of faith, and afterwards we'll try to understand. So we need matzah, faith, And after that comes the wine, which is the understanding. More specific to the Seder as well, there are aspects of the Seder that you will relate to strongly, that will make sense to you, that might resonate with you. And there will be those that not so much. And the trick is to try to embrace both. You can't just say, I'm only going to do the parts of the Seder that I can understand and appreciate, because that's only wine. You've also got to embrace the parts of the Seder that you don't yet understand. Now, what's up with the hand washing? The hand washing we do because most of us live our lives unconsciously. We live our lives like zombies, walking around, just reacting to everything around us. But how many of us are actually conscious and awake and aware of the world around us, of our purpose in this world? By washing our hands, we're ensuring that our hands are clean and pure and elevated and guided and directed. That we don't just do what we do because we bumped into that, but because we're proactive, we're preparing for something. We're washing our hands, we're cleansing and preparing ourselves. We're elevating our consciousness, elevating our actions in anticipation of mindful eating as opposed to gluttonous eating or just eating for the sake of eating. We're conscious eating. That's the washing of the hands. It's a very powerful, very modern, very trendy concept of being able to ensure that we are awake and conscious in our spirituality. At this point, we finished the Haggadah, we've washed the hands on the bread, we've ate the matzah, reclining. Now we come to the maror. Common misconception is that you're not supposed to heap on the maror like it's supposed to be, you're not supposed to heap on the charoses. What we do is we dip the maror in the charoses, in the sweet paste, but you don't have to heap on the charoses. It should be a minimal amount. And what you do is you're supposed to eat the bitter herbs. You take the lettuce and or the horseradish. Those are the two items, one in the middle of the Seder plate, one in the bottom middle of the Seder plate, and you dip the maror into the charoses. We say the blessing on the maror, al achilas maror, a blessing of eating, the commandment of eating maror, and we eat it. Since this maror doesn't remind us about freedom, but the bitter herbs remind us of slavery, therefore we do not recline like royalty while eating the maror as it's dipped in charoses. Now there's a meaning here to the maror. One of the meanings would be that there's a struggle that comes before triumph. Slavery came before freedom. Oppression came before anointment of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. Night comes before day. No one ever gave you a guarantee on life that life is going to be a bed of roses. This world is a dangerous place. No one ever came out of here alive. But the idea here is that the way Hashem designed his world is that night comes before day, darkness comes before light, bitterness comes before triumph. The maror comes before freedom. So if you're experiencing difficult times, it doesn't mean that you should jump ship. It doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. It means that you're almost there. Stay strong. It's actually one of the reasons why we use romaine lettuce. Romaine lettuce isn't. No, I'm sorry. Let's forget it. That was something else. So the idea here is that don't give up. Hold on tight. God is there with you. And when you're up against the cliff, he'll catch you, or he'll give you wings and teach you how to fly. Just stay in there, stay in the game. Don't give up. Hold on tight. Pray like pray like your life depends on it. And the bitter herbs are a very, very powerful realization that God is still carrying you in a way that we cannot fathom or understand. And when you look back at your life and you see the troubles and successes that you've achieved in your own life, you'll probably notice a pattern that you had difficult patches in your life, but those patches always led to sweet successes. And the only trick was to be able to hold on long enough to be able to see that light in the end. Now, what happened was in temple times when the Paschal lamb was offered and eaten on Pesach night, the great sage by the name of Hillel would make a point to eat all three major points of the Seder together. So he would take the Paschal lamb, the Pesach, and put it on a matzah together with maror. It was a sort of a sandwich that he had all together. And that is what we do as well. After the maror, we reach a stage called korech, which is binding it together, the sandwich. We take the matzah, the maror, and obviously we don't have a Paschal lamb, so we just eat the matzah and the maror together. Okay, now at this point we reach the meal, the festive meal. Pesach is a holiday, and it's a mitzvah to eat and be merry, and it's like any other Jewish holiday. We do that now, eating a hearty meal that includes meat, and there is no need to recline, even though many people will recline, because it's all about the concept of freedom. The meal will traditionally begin with eating the egg on the top left of the Pesach Seder plate. Remember, the top left egg, we said in part 1 of the series, the purpose of that egg is in order to represent the Chagiga offering, the holiday offering, which is brought on every Jewish holiday, besides for the Paschal lamb that was specific to Pesach. We do not, however, eat the zroa, which is the shank bone or the chicken neck, on the top right of the Seder plate, because since we don't have a temple, we don't eat that actual zroa, shank bone, so it shouldn't look like we're eating sacrifices outside of the temple. But what we do is that we eat the afikomen instead of it. The afikomen is the larger piece of matzah that we broke in the beginning of the Seder, which we started about today. And that one is representing the Paschal lamb. We eat that. It's supposed to be the last thing you're eating at the Seder. Obviously, there's two more cups of wine still to drink, but you're not supposed to eat anything after eating the afikomen. Remember, you have to eat. The minimum requirement is roughly half the size of an average size shmura matzah, or the whole of a small size shmura matzah. So you have to eat that once for the matzah obligation, once for the korech obligation, and once for the afikomen obligation, which means you have to have at least 3 half matzahs. You have to eat. Each person has to eat at least 3 half shmura matzahs in order to fulfill all 3 of those mitzvahs: the matzah, the sandwich, and the afikomen. Many people have the custom of hiding the afikomen so that their children will look for it. Purpose of which is then the kids will ransom it to the parents, and they'll get Pesach presents for bringing back the afikomen. And the point is that it keeps the kids awake. The idea here is about education, keeping the kids involved in the Pesach story, in the narrative, in the educational process. It's very late at night, but if you give them incentive, then they'll want to stay up and stay awake, right? When they're excited. In the Chabad custom, we don't let the kids hide the matzah because we don't want to encourage stealing on any level whatsoever. It's interesting. One of my kids asked me the other day if we might be able to hide the matzah this year. And it kind of broke my heart because I felt like, I wish, good morning, Diane, nice to see you. I wish I'd be able to keep my kids engaged that way. I'm going to have to talk to my wife about finding another way to keep the kids engaged, making sure that they don't fall asleep, because I think it would help them very much to stay awake. But the Chabad custom is not to do any stealing on any level whatsoever, because that itself is counter-educational. So you don't want to be educating your kids through a way which is counter-educational. At this point, we're getting very close to the end of the Seder. You finished your meal, you've had the afikomen, but the Seder is far from over. We still have 3 parts, which is Beirach, the benching, Hallel, the songs of praise, and Nirtza, which is, we'll talk about that in a moment, the conclusion. First thing we do after the benching is we fill up the third cup of wine, like the third point. This one is also, at this point, we also fill up the cup of Elijah. Elijah is sometimes known as Elijah, Eliyahu Navi, Eliyahu Tishbi, Eliyahu the prophet, or Eliyahu of Tishbi, because apparently he came from a place called Tishbi. And he's one of the most beloved Jewish prophets. One of his interesting roles is that he's supposed to be the harbinger of the redemption. He's supposed to announce the coming of Mashiach. And therefore, even though we know Mashiach can come at any time, there are times which are more opportune for the redemption. The night of Pesach itself, the anniversary of our redemption from Egypt, is the most opportune time for us to experience the future redemption. And therefore, just as we commemorate the exodus from Egypt with 4 cups of wine, so too we pour an additional cup of wine to symbolize the expectation and anticipation of our future redemption to be announced by Elijah. Besides, if you really believe that Mashiach is coming, then you believe that Elijah's coming. If Elijah's coming to your house, you didn't set a seat for him. You didn't set at least a cup of wine for him. I wrote recently a story about a community that prayed for rain. And the rabbi said, it's not going to rain because nobody here prayed properly. So he said, the community asked, what do you mean we didn't pray properly? Why do you think that we weren't sincere? And the rabbi said, if you prayed for rain, then how come nobody brought an umbrella? If you were serious about your prayers, then you would have brought an umbrella. If we truly are serious about the coming of Mashiach tonight on the Pesach night, then we would have poured a cup of wine for Elijah, because we actually expect him to come to tell us that Mashiach is coming. And that's a physical manifestation of our faith, a tangible belief that he's actually coming, which is why we pour the fifth cup, the extra cup of wine for Elijah. It's interesting to point out about benching that grace after meals, that when it comes to the numerous pre-blessings, they are of rabbinical origin. Hamotzi lechem and aretz, borei pri agafen. The blessings we make before food are of rabbinic origin, but the blessings that we make after food are actually of biblical origin. The grace after meals is of biblical origin, and the reason for that is like this: because when you're hungry, you don't need to be commanded to pray to God. It's when you're satisfied, that's when you need to be commanded to pray to God. It's easy for people to say please when they need something. But to say thank you when you already have what you need, that takes more of a motivation. So when you recognize the fact that you have already been satisfied, when you recognize the fact that you already have what you need, you might say, I don't need God anymore. That's all the more reason why you need to do the grace after meals. And think about it. People come to the Seder and they leave during the meal. And they don't stick around for the grace after meals. It's kind of ironic, The whole point of the Seder is to be able to engage in a meaningful and deep relationship with God. So we should at least stay to thank God when we're full, to realize that even when I have what I need, I'm still grateful to God for having given me what I need, and I don't rest upon my own laurels. Okay. We then drink the third cup of wine after the benching. Okay. Again, we say a blessing, ber per gafen, and we pour the fourth cup of wine, upon which we'll be reciting the Hallel. Hallel is songs of praises, many of which are familiar from your Shabbos morning services, and as these are added verses of praise specifically curated for the Seder night. One might ask why God needs so much praise. Is God of such low self-esteem that he needs us to praise him? I mean, what kind of insecure God do we have that he needs us to praise him so much? And the reason is not that God needs us to praise him. It's not that God needs to know that God is great. It's we that need to know that God is great. When we are able to verbalize and affirm these truths, that God is always there for us, that God is almighty and all powerful, it's then that we realize that we have nothing to be afraid of. It's then that we realize that we have no room for any anxieties or insecurities. It's then that we become empowered to be able to fulfill our mission. The songs of praises are not that God should know that God is great. They are there that we should know that God is great. Take a moment to reflect and meditate upon this incredible opportunity that God has granted you and me to be of Jewish faith, to be of his chosen people, and that he carried us from the dump to the top of Mount Sinai, and he appointed us as his chosen people. He cares about us and he needs us. How incredible is that? We then drink the fourth cup of wine after the Hallel with the blessing of Agafen, and we declare and proclaim L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in the rebuilt city of Jerusalem. By next year, Mashiach should already be here, and we should already be celebrating with Mashiach and the Paschal Lamb in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Some Haggadahs at this point have a line that is Chasal Sidur Pesach. We've reached the end of the ritual of Pesach. It is not the Chabad custom, however, to say these words, because the Pesach experience, the experience of freedom, of liberation, of divesting of our tormentors, inner and outer, that process never ends. It is a piece of work that we carry 365 days of the year. It's motivated and empowered within us on the Seder night, but it's something that we carry with us throughout the entire year. On the second night of Pesach, we do the Seder night all over again in the diaspora, not in Israel. While the motions are the same, the goal is to try to experience something that you didn't experience the night before. And the question is, can you make that happen? Let's, for some concluding thoughts here for our Seder crash course. First of all, I'd like to say that the Seder is one of the most unique Jewish experiences, because most of organized Judaism, is observed in the synagogue. When you come to the synagogue and there's a rabbi, there's a cantor, there's a committee that's taking care of organized Judaism, and you're pretty much a spectator in organized Judaism. But when it comes to the Seder, Judaism comes home with all of its nuances and details and rituals and measurements and meditations. Is something that you are empowered to lead. You now become the rabbi of your own home. And it's rare to find such a mitzvah that happens with such precision and detail, such intricate detail, that you are empowered to lead. Whereas every other mitzvah of Judaism, you can almost subcontract to the rabbi. This one is something that you have to deliver. And even if it's something like lighting the menorah, which also takes place at home, or eating a Shabbos meal, that's less intricate. I mean, lighting a menorah is a 5-minute process. It's not an entire evening. Shabbos meal is also, it's a pleasurable experience. It's not so, it's not much more than the recipes of the gefilte fish and the brisket. But when it comes to the Seder, there's so much to talk about. You're giving the sermon, and it's in your house. You're empowered. The idea of Pesach is all about freedom. And let's try to make sure that we understand that there's no word for history in Hebrew, because we don't believe in his story. It's only our story. The Seder is about personal freedom. It's about us identifying our Egypt, our asking ourselves, who am I a slave to? Who is encumbering my growth? Is it my inner demons, my inner traumas and abuses? Or is it something on the outside, a boss, a neighbor, a sister-in-law, a mother-in-law, a brother? What is it that is my Pharaoh? Pesach is the time to experience personal freedom in various different forms. When we break out of the cycle, the vicious cycle, and we embrace freedom, whether it's the stress of your professional life, the exhaustion of your family life, the negative associations you might have associated with your religious life. We have to identify our pharaohs and our Egypts that make up the storyline of our past. And the Seder night is, with all of its auditory and tactile items, is meant to bring us back to the past, to steer down our Egypt, to break that matzah, to look Pharaoh in the eye and say, no more. God redeemed our people back then, and God is redeeming me tonight. And not only are we being redeemed from the past and the present, but we're also preparing for the redemption of the future, the imminent coming of the Mashiach. When we pour the glass for Elijah, we very much anticipate his visit tonight, raising our eyes to heaven and saying, please, God, make it tonight. Make tonight our last night of exile and the first night of our redemption. Beautiful Marty, our own Mitzrayim, our own Egypt, is our own ego. That is our greatest challenge, our greatest Pharaoh, which towers up above us, right, like a king, inflates above us. That's our ego, which troubles us and prevents us from letting go and being true to ourselves. Because what will others say? What will this one say? What will that one say? I can't change, It's all of our ego, our self-awareness that prevents us from growing. We got to divest of Pharaoh, divest of the inflated ego, and allow ourselves to experience humility, which is the matzah that doesn't rise. Because when you experience humility, you can experience authenticity. Be your true self and express who you truly are. So what we've done is, in this 3-part series, is that we've broken up the Seder into 8 steps. The lighting of the candles and the Kiddush. We spoke about that in lesson 1 on Monday. Number 2, we spoke about the vegetable for karpas, and that was yesterday's lesson. Today we spoke about reciting the story of the Haggadah, eating the matzah, eating the maror, the festive meal, and conclusion through the benching, the grace of the meals, and the halal. And friends, that's it. That's a wrap. Pesach is not that difficult. It's not that complicated. Follow the Haggadah. I hope that you'll be able to experience a more meaningful Pesach this year. We've created a beautiful book, which we emailed to you this past Friday. It was emailed in this Friday's email, past Friday, for you to be able to. I think it's going to be also in this Friday's email, but you can pick up a copy here at the Chabad. If you want to drop by the Chabad, if you don't have Shmur Matzah, we'll give it to you with Shmur Matzah. If you do have Shmur Matzah, we'll give you a copy of this beautiful Pesach handbook that you can pick up at the Chabad. Drop by anytime between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. today, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday to be able to experience, to receive your Shmur Matzah. Please don't forget to sell your chametz. You can sell your chametz if you don't own chametz on Pesach at jewishgardens.com/chametz. That's jewishgardens.com/chametz, CHAMETZ, to make sure that you do not own any chametz on Pesach. Today's Wednesday, friends. Tonight we're having a very special event, Windows to the World event at 7:30 p.m. with the chief rabbi of Rostov, Russia. He's my good friend, Rabbi Chaim Danziger, and it's going to be on Zoom. This is the site of the worst Nazi atrocities in Russia, which is now a thriving Jewish community. We're going to be talking about that tonight at 7:30 with Windows to the World with Rabbi Chaim Danziger at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom. That's jewishgardens.com/Zoom, jewishgardens.com/Zoom. We hope that you'll join us. Shalom. Please share this video with anybody that you feel might benefit from it. This 3-part series, you'll find it on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, or here on facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. Thank you for joining me here today, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing. Shalom, and have a wonderful day.